when a ranger of Yellowstone National Park found an empty backpack and a map next to a hiking trail. He could not have imagined that 4 years later, he would make one of the most shocking discoveries in the history of the park. Human remains, carefully packed inside a tall tree trunk. It was the 10th of August, 2008. Daniel Moore, a 32-year-old software developer from Denver, Colorado, came to Yellowstone National Park to go on a solo hike. He planned to spend 5 days on a route through the western part of the park, where the trails are less frequented and nature has preserved its original beauty. Moore was an experienced hiker. In the past 7 years, he had completed more than 20 hikes in the mountains of Colorado and neighboring states. His backpack weighed 28 kilograms and contained everything needed for an autonomous stay in the wilderness. A tent, a sleeping bag, a gas burner, food supplies for 6 days, and a water filter. At the ranger office, Moore registered his route and received permission to set up his camp in the backcountry. According to his plan, he would follow the Shoshone Creek Trail to Shoshone Lake, then turn northwest to Fern Creek, and on the 3rd day of his hike, establish his base camp. From there, he planned trips to the nearby lakes and to return to his car on August 15. Moore left his green Wrangler Jeep in the parking lot at the entrance to the Shoshone Trail and set out at around 8 a.m. The first 2 days of the hike passed without incident. Moore met several groups of tourists hiking in the opposite direction and exchanged the usual greetings with them. The weather was typical for August in Yellowstone. During the day, the temperature rose to 23 degrees, and at night, it dropped to 7 degrees. It did not rain, but in the mountains, storm clouds often formed, dissolving by evening. On August 12, around noon, a group of tourists from California met Moore on the trail 4 kilometers from Shoshone Lake. They later told investigators that he looked cheerful and satisfied and stopped to talk about the weather and the route. Moore told them that he planned to camp at Fern Creek and stay there for 2 nights. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. On August 15, Moore did not appear at the parking lot where his Jeep was waiting for him. That evening, the park administration reported him missing. A search and rescue team set out early on the morning of August 16 along his route. They found his backpack and a topographic map near the trail 3 kilometers from the planned campsite, but Moore himself was not there. The backpack was neatly propped against a pine tree, as if it had been deliberately placed there. The map was folded and lay beside it. There were no signs of a struggle or damage to the equipment. Inside Moore's backpack were all his belongings: sleeping bag, tent, food, stove, spare clothing. Only the water bottle and a small knife were missing. Money and documents were untouched. The search teams expanded the area and combed a 5 kilometers radius around the location of the backpack. They used search dogs, a helicopter, and a thermal imaging camera, but could not find any trace of Moore. The search lasted 2 weeks. A total of 47 people participated, including ranchers, volunteers, and specialists from the Search and Rescue Service. They checked all streams, ravines, rock crevices, and dense bushes in the area. Special attention was paid to places where a person could fall or get injured. The helicopter flew 12 times and photographed the area from the air. Divers examined lakes and deep spots in rivers. On August 29, the search was officially called off. The case of Daniel Moore was handed over to the Department for Unresolved Crimes of the National Park Service. The investigators considered several theories: accident, attack by a wild animal, murder, or suicide. The bear theory seemed unlikely. Bears were rare in this area, and no signs of an attack were found. Suicide was also excluded, since Moore had left no note and shortly before his hike had bought tickets for a concert scheduled a month after his return. Moore's family hired a private detective and offered a reward of $10,000 for useful information. They distributed flyers with a photo of Daniel throughout the region and questioned local residents. Moore's brother, Robert, came every 3 months to Yellowstone and searched himself for traces of the missing man. He walked several times the entire route of his brother, questioned tourists and rangers, but without success. Time passed, and the case gradually fell into oblivion. In the archive of the National Park Service, another folder appeared with the label Daniel Moore missing. During their patrols, the rangers regularly found items, pieces of fabric, empty cans, old shoes, and checked whether they were connected to Moore's disappearance. But all finds turned out to be false trails. In 2009, another tourist disappeared in the same area of the park. Michael Greenberg from the state of Oregon. He was found 4 days later with a broken leg, 10 kilometers away from the trail. He had gotten lost during a thunderstorm and had fallen into a small ravine. The story of Greenberg reminded of the Moore case, but did not provide any new clues. The search was resumed for a few days, but again nothing was found. On the 21st of July 2012, Ranger Thomas Collins was patrolling a trail 8 kilometers from the place where Moore's backpack had been found 4 years earlier. It was hot. The temperature rose to 28 degrees. Collins noticed an unusual smell that became stronger the closer he came to a group of fallen trees. The smell reminded of decomposition, but it was old and musty. The ranger decided to check the source. Among the fallen trunks stood out a large pine tree that had fallen several years earlier during a storm. The trunk was hollow. The wood had already rotted before the tree fell. Collins looked into the cavity and saw something that caused him to immediately call for reinforcements and cordon off the area. Inside the tall trunk lay human remains, wrapped in a dark blue sleeping bag and tied with leather straps. Collins touched nothing and immediately contacted the park administration. 40 minutes later, a group of investigators led by Detective Margaret Stevens of the county police and forensic expert Dr. Harris arrived at the site. The area was cordoned off within a radius of 50 meters with yellow tape. A photographer took pictures of the site from various angles. Then the remains were carefully retrieved from the tree. The sleeping bag was of the same brand that had been listed in Daniel Moore's inventory. On one of the straps, initials burned in with a homemade device could be seen. The medical examiner conducted a preliminary examination right at the site. The skeleton was almost complete, except for some small foot bones. The skull showed characteristic injuries: a crack in the parietal area and a dent above the right temple. The lower jaw was broken in 2 places. Dr. Harris determined that the jaw fractures had not healed properly, which indicated that the victim had lived for several days or weeks after the injury. The remains were sent to the forensic laboratory in Billings, Montana. A DNA analysis confirmed the identity. It was Daniel Moore. A detailed examination of the skeleton showed that death had been caused by a cranial brain trauma, which resulted from several blows with a heavy object. On the skull, metallic microparticles were found, possibly from the weapon used. Strange was how the body had gotten into the tree. The cavity of the trunk had a diameter of about 70 centimeters and a length of almost 2 meters. To fit the body of an adult man, there required considerable effort and time. Someone obviously knew this tree and used it as a hiding place. Detective Stevens began the renewed investigation with checking all persons who had been in the park at the time of Moore's disappearance. The park administration provided lists of all registered visitors from August 7 to 15, 2008. On the list were 234 people, including tourists, researchers, and temporary workers. Special attention was given to the temporary workers of the park, seasonal rangers, trail wardens, and technical staff. In the summer of 2008, 7 temporary workers were employed in the western part of the park. 5 of them had an impeccable reputation and had been working for several years in the national park system. 2 others required a more thorough check. Allen Hughes, a 37-year-old trail warden, was hired in June 2008. Among his tasks belonged the monitoring of the hiking trails in the western part of the park, the repair of signposts and bridges over streams, the removal of garbage, and the monitoring of the compliance of the park rules by the visitors. He lived in a service house 20 kilometers from the place where Moore's backpack was found. During the checking of Hughes's resume, disturbing details came to light. In the year 2006, he worked as a caretaker in Glacier National Park in Montana, but was dismissed after complaints from tourists about his aggressive behavior. Visitors reported that Hughes roughly demanded the presentation of camping permits, threatened with fines for minor violations, and followed people by hiding in the forest. A family filed an official complaint and claimed that Hughes had broken into their camp in the middle of the night under the pretext of an inspection, but behaved inappropriately and frightened the children. In the year 2007, Hughes got a job in Grand Canyon National Park, but worked there only for 4 months. He was dismissed after an incident with a group of college students. According to eyewitnesses, Hughes accused the young people of having violated the camping rules, ordered them to leave the site immediately. And when the students tried to explain the situation, Hughes grabbed one of them by the shirt and pushed him away. The park rangers intervened, but no formal report was made. He was only asked to resign voluntarily. Despite these incidents, the administration of Yellowstone hired Hughes for a temporary position. The personnel department did not check his career path thoroughly enough and limited itself to the checking of his criminal record. He presented letters of recommendation, which later turned out to be forged. Among Hughes's tasks was exactly to patrol the part of the trail where Daniel Moore had disappeared. His work schedule foresaw daily duties from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening. Hughes should check the condition of the hiking trail, mark damaged signposts, remove fallen branches, and monitor the compliance of the established rules by the visitors. Detective Stevens contacted several tourists who had met Hughes in August 2008. Their memories drew the picture of a man obsessed with power and rules. Hughes criticized the visitors for trivialities: wrongly set up tents, campfires not lit in the designated places, conversations that were too loud. He could observe a group of tourists for a long time, then suddenly appear behind the trees and demand the presentation of their IDs. Gerald Whitman, a tourist from Arizona, told the investigators about his encounter with Hughes on the 12th of August, 2008, the same day on which a group from California had seen Daniel Moore for the last time. Whitman had set up his camp with his family near Fern Creek, not far from the place where Moore had planned to stay overnight. Around 4 p.m., Hughes came to their camp and demanded the presentation of a camping permit. The family presented all required documents, but Hughes explained that their tent was set up too close to the stream and violated the environmental regulations. He ordered them to move their camp 200 meters further up the slope. Whitman tried to object and pointed out that other tourists had set up their tents in similar places, but Hughes became aggressive. He raised his voice, said he would fine the family for violation of the rules, and ordered them to pack their things immediately. Whitman's wife was frightened and began packing the backpacks. Hughes stood nearby and watched them, from time to time making remarks and criticizing their actions. After the family had relocated their camp, Hughes went along the path in the direction of Shoshone Lake. Exactly from there, Daniel Moore should come. Whitman remembered that Hughes had a large hiking backpack and a long metal walking stick with him. Later, Whitman saw smoke from a campfire in about the direction in which the park ranger had gone, but decided not to check it. The family was frightened by Hughes's aggressiveness and wanted to avoid further encounters with him. These witness statements prompted the investigators to focus on Allen Hughes as the main suspect. Detective Stevens applied for a search warrant for his house and his workplace. At this time, Hughes no longer worked in Yellowstone. His contract had expired in September 2008, and the park administration had not extended it due to complaints from visitors. After his dismissal from Yellowstone, Hughes returned to his hometown Casper in Wyoming, where he rented a small house on the outskirts of town. He worked as a warehouse worker in a sporting goods store and led a withdrawn life. His neighbors described him as a sullen person who rarely communicated with others and often went away with backpack and hiking equipment over the weekend. On the 27th of July, 2012, 6 days after the discovery of Moore's body, the police searched Hughes's house. In the garage, they found a collection of knives and machetes, which Hughes allegedly had used for hiking. One of the knives, a 20 centimeters long hunting blade, attracted the particular attention of the investigators. On the blade, there were microscopically small spots, which after first analysis were identified as possible traces of blood. In addition, in the garage, a metal walking stick was found, exactly the one that the tourist Whitman had seen. The knob of the stick showed dents and scratches, and the investigation revealed that it contained organic particles. Also, detailed topographic maps of Yellowstone Park with markings in red pen were found. Some markings coincided with the places where Moore's backpack and his remains had been found. In Hughes's bedroom, the police found a diary, which he had kept during his work in the park. The entries were short and factual, but some pages contained strange comments about tourists. Hughes described the visitors of the park as disturbers, intruders into nature, and city parasites. Especially, solo traveling tourists angered him, whom he called arrogant and idiotic. The entry from the 12th of August, 2008 read, "Another loner believes the park was created for him. He violates the rules and ignores warnings. Such people must be taught." The next entry followed only a week later and contained the sentence, "Problem solved. The park has become cleaner." These finds gave reason for the arrest of Hughes. On the 3rd of August 2012, he was without warning arrested at his workplace. He offered no resistance but refused to answer questions without a lawyer. He was taken to the county jail and charged with first-degree murder. Laboratory tests confirmed that the spots on the knife came from Daniel Moore. The DNA analysis produced an exact match with the samples that had been taken from the remains. The metal particles that had been found on the skull of the victim matched the composition of the knob of Hughes's stick. The experts also established that the skull fractures could have been caused by exactly such an object. The organic particles on the stick contained hair and skin fragments, which through genetic analysis could be assigned to Moore. In addition, in the sole of Hughes's shoes, soil particles were found that were characteristic of the place where the backpack of the victim had been found. All these pieces of evidence created a convincing picture of Hughes's involvement in the murder. Hughes's court-appointed lawyer tried to build a defense on the version of an accident. He claimed his client had found the already lifeless body of the tourist and for unknown reasons had hidden it in a tree. This version, however, did not explain the presence of the DNA of the victim on Hughes's personal items and did not match the nature of the skull injuries. The trial began on the 21st of January 2013 in Cody, Wyoming. The prosecutor presented a detailed picture of the events, which was based on material evidence and witness statements. According to the version of the prosecution, Hughes met Moore on the afternoon of August 12 on the hiking trail and criticized him for a violation of certain park rules. There was an argument between the two men, during which Hughes struck Moore with his stick-on head and face. The first blow broke the victim's jaw, but was not fatal. Moore tried to defend himself or to flee, but received several further blows to the head, which led to his death by craniocerebral trauma. After the murder, Hughes carried Moore's backpack to the hiking trail and left it there. In order to create the impression that the hiker had simply gotten lost or had become victim of an accident, he wrapped the body in the sleeping bag of the victim, tied it with straps, and hid it in a tall tree trunk, which he knew from his patrol rounds in the area. The most important witness of the prosecution was the hiker Gerald Whitman, who reported an encounter with the aggressive Hughes on the day of Moore's disappearance. His testimony confirmed that the park ranger was in the area at the right time and behaved inappropriately towards the park visitors. The defense tried to call into question the reliability of the DNA analysis and claimed that the evidence could have been manipulated. The lawyer also pointed out that there were no eyewitnesses to the murder and that the motive for the deed did not appear serious enough. However, the totality of the evidence was too convincing. The jurors were particularly impressed by the entries in Hughes's diary, which showed his hostile attitude toward tourists and his tendency to violence. A psychiatric expert described the accused as a person with an antisocial personality disorder and a tendency to aggression against those whom he considered to be disturbers of the existing order. On the 14th of March 2013, the jurors found Allen Hughes guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of early release. Hughes listened to the verdict without emotion and showed no remorse for his deed. After the trial, the family of Daniel Moore finally received answers to the questions that had tormented them for 4.5 years. Daniel's mortal remains were handed over to the relatives for burial. His brother Robert said to journalists that the family was relieved that the murderer had been punished, but the pain over the loss would never go away. The administration of Yellowstone National Park carried out an internal investigation and changed the procedures for the hiring of temporary workers. Now the resumes of applicants are examined more thoroughly, including obligatory conversations with former employers and psychological tests. The case of Daniel Moore became one of the most sensational crimes in the history of Yellowstone Park and showed how important it is to carefully check persons to whom the safety of the visitors is entrusted. The hollow tree, in which the remains of the murdered tourist had been hidden for 4 years, was cut down and burned at the request of the family of the victim.